On today's World Insight, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken meets Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Canada's visit steadied the ties between the world's two largest economies. And Blinken's visit to Beijing capped off months of American tech CEOs visiting China. Will people-to-people exchange provide the thaw for China-U.S. ties?
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. When President Xi Jinping met the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing, Xi said that state-to-state interactions should always be based on mutual respect and sincerity. Blinken had previously met the Chinese diplomats Wang and Qin. Xi noted Wang and Qin described their talks with Blinken as candid and in-depth. This is the very first visit to China by U.S. Secretary of State in nearly 5 years, and also the first cabinet official from the Biden administration to visit China. With China-U.S. ties growing frosty over recent years, can these high-level meetings break the ice? Let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Beijing, Ding Sheng, former founding dean at the School of Pharmaceutical Sciences with Tsinghua University. In Washington, D.C., Subra Gupta, senior Asia-Pacific International Relations Policy Specialist at Institute of China-America Studies. Also in Beijing, Rong Ying, vice president of the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Now, the two sides, the Chinese president meeting the U.S. Secretary of State, big readout coming from the Chinese side. Mr. Rong, very briefly from you, first time visit by Secretary of State of the Biden administration to China, the first time in 5 years, also by senior U.S. official. Really, how do you see now, after these rounds of talks, the significance of this visit? What does it say about the future relations?
Well, certainly this is a very important and significant meeting, I think, in the context where the relationship has been met with huge difficulties and problems, particularly in the beginning of this year. And remember, I think during the meeting of President Xi and Secretary Blinken, President made very clear about his views about the importance of a relationship and the importance that China attaches to the stable, healthy relationship. He made very clear, I think, China is ready to work with the United States for a stable relationship. For the sake of history, for the sake of mankind, and for the peace and stability of the world. And he goes on by saying that the United States should translate. China is a state committed to the understanding he reached with President Biden, and he hopes that the United States will translate these words, the commitment to actions.
Into actions, indeed. Mr. Gupta, obviously actions were not necessarily being realized over the past few months since the last meeting, G20 summit. But now, how much hope do we see in the latest readouts by both sides?
I would say there is a good deal of hope that we should have in the relationship going forward. The important thing is there have been good intentions. You know, when President Xi and President Biden, they had a virtual meeting November 2021, they expressed good intentions. They made important assurances and commitments to each other, which were repeated and expanded upon in Bali. And the hope was that that would provide a foundation for further movement forward to frame the outlines, the framework for this relationship. But the point is the events have been interfering and the politics has come also interfered with the process. So, of course, this is useful, and it's useful even if we don't have traction in the short run. but these are useful commitments to make even in the longer run. Perhaps if Mr. Biden gets re-elected, there will be a real opportunity at that point of time. But I see a horizon for progress in the relationship going forward for the next 6 months.
This is going to be a window opportunity, isn't it, Professor Ding? I know you are not a politician, you are not an analyst on current affairs either, but you have been playing an important role as the dean and the director of the Institute for Health and Drugs Discovery, which Bill certainly visited during his trip to China. So tell me about your take on this window opportunity as an important figure in this people-to-people relations.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say certainly people, in China as well as I think in the U.S. are very much looking forward to restoration of, China-U.S. relationship. Certainly over the last quite a number of years, the relationship has not been that smooth, quite different from, a long past. Certainly people, working in academics, culture, and many other sectors aside from, politics, people are really looking forward to a better relationship. And also, there are so many things people can actually work together to advance, common shared interest, shared causes. Those are the areas actually we look forward to. Certainly, Blinken's visit actually would signal that.
This is certainly a follow-up of the earlier commitment made by both sides, the two presidents, during the G20 summit. Let's hear what the U.S. President Biden reaffirmed during the meeting to President Xi. He's talked about a stable, prosperous China is good for the United States and the world. He also said the United States respects China's system and does not seek to change it. He said that U.S. does not seek a new Cold War, does not seek to revitalize alliances against China, does not support Taiwan independence, does not support two China or one China, one Taiwan, and has no intention to have a conflict with China. The U.S. president earlier also said that U.S. side has no intention to seek decoupling from China or to contain China. Pretty much of all of these words have been repeated if you look at the Chinese official readout for the meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. Secretary of State Blinken. Now, Mr. Gupta, when they are being reaffirmed by the U.S. top diplomat, Secretary of State Blinken, is he and his organization going to contribute that constructively?
I would say yes, they would contribute that constructively. That is the intent. It's important also not to parse continuously the integrity and the intentions behind each of these commitments, because there is indeed a lack of trust, and both sides understand that. So one must take these at face value and try to entrench them within the framework of the relationship going forward. So yes, my sense would be the U.S. doesn't hew to some of the things that it did say, that President Biden did say, but the fact of the matter is that let's endow trust to what the U.S. said. From the Chinese side also, there were statements made by President Xi. We don't want to displace the United States. We don't want to break up the international system as it exists right now. We don't interfere in the U.S.'s affairs. Let's take those things at face value and let's move forward. And if the relationship can be framed, I think they provide a very thick ballast to support the ship of U.S.-China relations. And the idea is to actualize that and create the trust that is necessary.
These are promises made by both sides. These are the benchmarks for very important foundation to be made to build trust, which is such a rare commodity now between China and the United States. Mr. Rong, how much will China follow those words, and how much do you see these reaffirmation by both sides in these important meetings will mean for future actions?
Well, certainly I think the implementation of these commitments and statements are very much important, as China has repeatedly said that it wants to see these commitments, these understandings has been followed through. And as a matter of fact, if we look at the result of this visit, I think what would be the testing ground or test would be that how much I think these words and the statement would be translated into action, particularly from the United States side. From the Chinese perspective, it is very clear China has said what it means, but the United States that has been going back or that has been not implemented, and more importantly, I think they have even been back their words even much longer. So this is something I think what from Chinese perspectives, the problems, where the problems lies.
All right, and just follow up where Mr. Gupta also earlier quoted, and here I quote as well. China respects U.S. interests and does not seek to challenge or replace the United States. This is coming from the official readout from the meeting between Chinese President and also U.S. Secretary of State. So what does that mean, Mr. Rong, very briefly?
Well, there are quite a lot, but the most important thing from Chinese perspective, the issues like two dimensions. One is the issues that touch upon China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and development interest. For example, the question of Taiwan is the most important thing, and the State Councilor Qin Gang made it very clear this is the core of the core interest. And there are the other issues, of course, in terms of the so-called competition. I think China does not want United States to use competition as an excuse to suppress contain China. And President Xi, again, in his meeting, made it very clear the United States should respect China's right for development, of course, China too. So this is, I think, touched upon the very issue, that created the problem or the trust problem between the two countries.
Going to you, Professor Ding, I mean, you are having a better pulse of, how the intellectual community, scientists in China are thinking, when it comes to China respect the U.S. interests and does not seek to challenge or replace the United States. This quote coming from the Chinese president during the meeting with U.S. Secretary of State. What is your understanding of it? What, you and your peers are thinking?
Yeah, I guess I can provide my perspective. I would say certainly U.S. is still leading in science and technology. Certainly, many Chinese scholars actually have went to the U.S. And learn and also contributed significantly to scientific development. Economic development, so I would say also for there also a long long path for future scientific discovery and development. So in reality, actually, there would be more collaboration, cooperation. People can really work together actually to advance scientific discovery to really advance humanity. So there's really in that regard, there's really no competition. So that's in my view, actually, it's really not about challenge, each other's status in that regard. It's more about how we could really work together, cooperate to advance.
Cooperate, complement seems to be more the right words to describe the feelings of the scientific community from both sides, it seems. Mr. Gupta, one of the most important things is what's going to follow the meeting. We talk about the actions. One of the most important actions is whether systemic consultation systems are going to be established. Back in the earlier Obama administration, there are hundreds of different kinds of communications by both sides established. Even during the Trump administration, there are some important mechanisms that have been followed. But during this administration, there has been almost zero. So how are we going to see the systemic mechanism being established following this visit by the U.S. Secretary of State? At what level? What should be the efficient number? And what should be the level of discussion, please?
Yeah, I don't think there's enough time in this administration to really set up those mechanisms. What I think the way that both sides are approaching the relationship at this point of time is at the macro level, try to create a strategic framework. And so they're talking about reassurances so that they can create that trust. Beneath that, they are now going to restart those working groups. I'm assuming the working groups which will start, we'll probably have Yellen sometimes in Treasury Secretary. The Treasury working groups will start. The economic working groups will start. The trade working groups will start. The climate working groups will start. I don't see that happening on the defense side, on the technology control sides. So commerce and defense side, I don't see that happening. But what I do see going forward is, we have another important opportunity in November when President Xi is due to be in San Francisco for the APEC summit. And that creates a basis to start creating deliverables where Mr. Biden and Mr. Xi can work something out and further solidify the relationship. So I think the horizons going forward are essentially these 5-6 months to try to lock down something which is useful and productive in the bilateral relationship at the leaders level.
Yeah, at the very beginning, I asked all of you gentlemen about this window opportunity, and I'm sure you are coming back to this point. 5 to 6 months, Mr. Rong, 5 to 6 months, what can be done from your perspective, given the readouts and the latest words coming from both sides?
Yeah, I think if we follow, the readouts of the meeting between State Councilor
what can be done?
Well, I think follow up with concrete actions. First and foremost, like the meetings, reciprocal meetings by State Councilor Qin Gang can be certainly one, but of course it all depends on the so-called suitability of the circumstances. But there are other concrete things, I think specific things which being reached actually. For example, the so-called facilitation of the people-to-people interactions, the exploration of the increase of flights, and other needed, I think, steps that would help to facilitate P2P exchanges. We're talking about the academics, we're talking about students, and so on. Unfortunately, they all has been restricted or even sanctions for some reasons. We know all. And as we look ahead in the next 6 months, I think other important thing would be, again, agreement for negotiations or consultation on the principles to guide the relationship. This is, again, very much important. But with these sort of consultations, meetings, high-level interaction going on, we hope that they will prepare grounds, even though we have limited times, limited window opportunities for a steady, stable relationship in the months and hopefully in the years ahead.
Of course, the next year will be the election year for the United States. Turbulence can be expected by everybody in the world as a result of the politics going on in Washington. But what can we do during this window opportunity is still very important. You talk about, all of you, people-to-people relations. This is really the most important foundation for the bilateral relations between China and the United States. We're going to talk about that after this break. Be right back. Still to come on World Insight, Blinken's visit to Beijing, capped by months of American tech CEOs visiting China. Will people-to-people exchange provide the thaw for China-U.S. ties? Next. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. While meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, Chinese President Xi Jinping pointed out that the world needs a generally stable China-U.S. relationship. This year, many American business icons paid visit to China and expressed their confidence in the Chinese market and the Chinese economy. Meanwhile, there are also outstanding figures from philanthropy that are coming to China. For example, Bill Gates. During the meeting with Bill Gates, Chinese President Xi said that the foundation of China-U.S. ties relies on the people. So can people-to-people exchanges provide the breakthrough in China-U.S. ties? Once again, we have our panelists. Go to you, Mr. Ding. You accompanied Bill Gates during his visit to your institute, the Institute of Health and Drug Discovery. You helped to establish, and you also led to his briefed him on the latest updates of development in that field. Tell me more about how do you, as a scientist, feel about this interaction between Mr. Gates and the Chinese president? What does it say about the pulse of people to people?
Absolutely. Certainly, as President Xi noted, actually, Bill Gates is an old friend of China. Certainly, before the pandemic, Bill actually has been visiting China every year. Certainly, his foundation has done pretty significant work in China, and also work in China for the for developing country, for the rest of the world. So that's, I think, what President Xi referred to, people to people interaction. I would say in the scientific community, even during the pandemic, during the last few years, there have been actually ongoing collaborations, cooperations. Certainly during the pandemic, our drug discovery efforts at our institute in Beijing actually were helped by our international collaborators. Many are from the United States. We certainly continue those collaborations on those global health issues, on the common shared interest. So again, President Xi's meeting with Bill Gates certainly signal actually the people-to-people interaction is really a great strength actually for both countries.
Right.
To set aside the political views, differences, and just to work on a shared interest to advance humanity.
For global development. Yes, Mr. Gupta, what Mr. Ding just indicated is just one of those many, many fresh examples. Crystallization about people-to-people exchange. What does that mean for U.S.-China relations? Tell me more about if this is being shared, the information from this visit by U.S. State Blinken to the United States in a fair way. How much can we expect some decent environment and ambience can be established for academics, for students' exchanges, and for cultural exchanges, mutual communications between the two countries?
I think it can open the door and open the door fairly widely. Part of the reason the door shut was because of COVID. Yes, it was also to do with the fact that the Trump administration came down very hardline and tried to shear apart U.S.-China relations, not at the state-to-state level, but at the people-to-people level, close consulates here, et cetera. And that process, as I think the Biden administration fortunately is moving away from and has moved away from, the Justice Department investigations, et cetera. So I think it's important, because here's the most important part in my view. The two countries have very different political systems, but if the people-to-people get to meet each other, they realize how very same they are and how incredibly talented they are from a commercial and an entrepreneurial perspective, and how much they share then rather than what they divide. And it becomes very important because this provides the foundation on which politicians can then build relationships, because otherwise, even if they do exchange important assurances like they did at this meeting, they're always looking over their shoulder wondering, are they getting too far ahead in the politics, from the politics of US-China relations? And politics needs to come along also. And that's why I think people-to-people is important. And
politics needs to be based on facts, not just rhetoric. Politics needs to be based on the interests of the people. Mr. Rong, you think about many of the facts that Mr. Gupta mentioned about China-U.S. people-to-people exchanges. These are happening to hundreds of thousands of people on both sides. While we speak, how many Chinese students are studying in the United States? How many of us have great American friends? And how many American visitors have visited China? But now, if you look at the numbers, for example, U.S. Students in China studying right now, very, very limited. So we need to look at the reality right now and think about why such a suddenly shift, and what should be done, politics-wise, to pave the way for the good lives of people on both sides, Mr. Rong?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think certainly the COVID-19 has caused so much disruptions and mind
but that should not be the excuses for the future.
That's just a symptom. Yeah, the big problem is because of the misunderstanding or it's no understanding and the politicization or securitization of this relationship. I think the media has, unfortunately, the U.S. has not played such a constructive or role in a way to help. Rather, it is playing up the problems and of course the policies, the restrictions played by the administration in terms of these exchanges and the cases, even though some of them are isolated.
So now, let me just not reflect back, but looking forward, because we are talking about future. Putting finger pointing aside, what can be done at least? What does it take to do all these very basic things of interactions between the two peoples? The flights, the students coming here, the visas easier, and also more interactions, communications between real friends on both sides. What can be done now?
Well, I think the most important thing is, of course, let us have more flights so that it will be easier and cheaper to go and come and go. This is the most important. This is, again, unfortunately, I think this is one of the concrete sort of results of this visit. But the most important thing is, of course, I think the restrictions that has been placed by the administration, the U.S. administration, on Chinese students in terms of applying some measures and restrictions, or the blacklist of some Chinese universities, top universities, graduate students who want to apply, go to the United States for further studies, but unfortunately they are being either sanctioned or restricted or even denied. So these are the things that has been so far, I think, preventing the normal exchanges of students and others.
So here's a vicious cycle, Professor Ding. No communications, then leads to misunderstanding. Misunderstanding leads to fertile ground for bad sense politics. And bad sense politics leads to further policy, further leads to misunderstanding and less space to explore for both sides, especially those constructive ideas from both sides. How do you see this vicious cycle? Well, we are in the trap of it right now.
Yeah, actually, I'm quite hopeful. Again, sort of even over the last few years, there had been tensions, due to political reasons. Our scientific communities and many other sectors are not, ties are not severed. We're not really, broken. There are continued interactions. And again, with the end of pandemic, I think actually adding more flights, adding more friendly, policies to foster interactions. I think this will change.
Mr. Gupta, we only have 20 seconds left. Would you also your views?
I'd say do one big mega project. Both sides, we have aging populations. Do something together in a big way on Alzheimer's research. I think that can go a long way in having scientific and people-to-people ties and cooperation.
We need to bring both the young and the old together, certainly. Thank you so much for all of your input and insights. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us.